Hello, everyone, to the latest episode of The Objectivist.
And The Vegan.
Today is a very, very, very special episode, or as Ed Sullivan would say, a really big shoe. Today is a milestone in the history of this podcast.
Yes,
we have with us today a guest who has written material for Dick Cavett, as well as episodes of Murder, She Wrote, and documentaries on John Lennon, Elvis, and Dr. Martin Luther King. He is a veteran voice actor, having done voice work for series such as The Oz Kids and Snoopy's Reunion. And for 3 years, from 1974 to 77, he worked as an assistant in the house of one of the world's most iconic comedians, Groucho Marx. His book, Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House, has just been reissued by my future publisher, Bear Manor Media, as well as a new audiobook version available on Amazon and Audible, as well as his own website, stevestoliar.com. The book is brimming with stories about his experience with not only Groucho, but iconic comedians Bob Hope, George Burns, Mae West, and a personal favorite of mine, Georgie Jessel. Give it up for a man whose life Dick Cavett once described as Faustian. He is Steve Stoliar.
Welcome, Steve. Welcome.
Thank you. I didn't want to interrupt you. You can just go on saying wonderful things about me. Although I think at the beginning you said I was a millstone for the show, and I don't appreciate that.
Milestone. Millstone.
Oh, I misunderstood you. Okay.
I hold our respective thing as the millstone of our duo. So you're the milestone, I'm the millstone, and then we'll have to find another stone for Jack to be.
All right, maybe Mick Jagger.
One thing that was really interesting while I was emailing you back and forth for the past few weeks was you talked about the process of recording your new audiobook for the Raised Eyebrows book. Can you give us a little bit of a backdoor story of recording an audiobook? Because obviously it's something neither of us has ever done.
I had never done it either, and it was quite an adventure. It was gratifying because I couldn't blame anyone for screwing up my words other than myself. But it was recorded in a very hot and essentially airless room that the producer had as his studio, and we had to actually take oxygen breaks.
Oh, wow.
Because his air conditioning made noise, and he didn't want that to be picked up by the microphone. So we would sort of try to soak up or store cool, and then he would turn that off, and then I would read like a chapter until I was drenched in sweat and knocking back Diet Cokes. And it took a long time because the book is 300 and something pages, and I think the audiobook is 11 or 13 hours or something like that. However, I'm very proud of it, and the producer was startled because I would shift from one voice into another when I'd be reading my narration of what happened when I was at Groucho's house, and he was used to people reading all of one voice so they could focus on it, and all of another voice, and then editing them. So I saved him a lot of time, but after all these years of telling these stories, I just naturally will, slip into it and say, there was a knock at the door and I opened it, and George Burns walked in and said, "Hi, you want to live a long time? Become an actor. You'll live to be an old man like Groucho and me. All right, let's have lunch."
Well, I introduce you to all the people that I know. I tell them that you are the person in the world who does the best Bennett surf.
Only because no one else does. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I think it is one of our most illustrious midget actors. Is it, in fact, Angelo Rosito? No, I'm sorry. All right, that was my best guess.
It's true. You're the best Bennett surf I've ever heard.
Yes.
I'm educated.
Another one.
As this show goes along, I'm slowly indoctrinating Jack into the obscure showbiz names that I know and are the stuff of your whole life.
I thrive on obscurity because there's no competition.
Exactly. Well, that's why I decided to write a book about Margaret Dumont, because there's not a lot of competition.
Right, so no matter how bad it is, it's still the definitive book on it.
And Bennett Cerf actually has a rather odd connection to this podcast, because Bennett Cerf worked at Random House, was the head publisher at Random House.
He founded Random House.
He did, and he published Atlas Shrugged.
Oh. Yep. Now, Steve, our show's called The Objectivist and the Vegan, as you may have heard, and Stephen is a big Ayn Rand fan. We're dying to know where you fall on the spectrum. I'm not as big a fan as Stephen. I'm almost not a fan at all, actually.
Well, I like the Fountainhead film,
which is a very, very good film for those of you who haven't seen it.
I'm concerned that Paul Ryan is a big fan of her. It seems like if he's really a big fan of hers, then I must be very careful about embracing her approach to things. But then if Stephen thinks a lot of her, unless he's, an ardent Republican.
Oh, no.
Then I'm not sure, but I don't know. I haven't really read much of her, so I can't say. I only really know by her reputation. Mm-hmm. But I like the Fountainhead, and there you have that. So you're the vegan?
Yeah, I'm the vegan. So I come at it from a different perspective. I think I agree with you. I'm more familiar with Ayn Rand's kind of public figures. That
the reputation.
Yeah, and it's not exactly excited me. But Stephen makes her case from time to time. I was just curious where you...
Yeah, no, I was going to ask that too. It is interesting. And speaking of people that are very interesting but have checkered pasts, you were at Groucho's house. Well, actually, first of all, can you just briefly summarize what you did within the confines of Groucho's house, just so our audience who hasn't read Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House?
What's that? You imply that there are people who haven't read my book?
Well, I hope they would.
They're waiting for the audiobook, I think.
Yeah, and now that there is an audiobook, now we can plug it as all that we can, so hopefully more people, when they hear us...
I thought you were going to ask for my opinion on veganism.
Oh,
well,
we love it.
We'll listen to that one, too.
If God hadn't meant for people to eat animals, he wouldn't have made them out of meat.
It sounds like something Groucho would say.
Some people say humans are made from that same substance, though.
Well,
have you ever feasted
my hands just like cannibals do? Here's an obscure joke for you that maybe neither of you will get, but I'll tell it for the 3 people listening at home. Did you hear about the cannibals who ate Bruce Bennett and shit bricks?
That one is lost even on me.
I'll explain it because there was a Tarzan. One of the people who played Tarzan was Bruce Bennett, and his real name was Herman Bricks, B-R-I-N.
Oh.
Then you see, I've interwoven the Tarzan cannibal. Anyway, go ahead. You want to know what I did? Good luck editing this. It's all seems to be one continuous run-on sentence.
Well, that's most of our podcast, really. So we're keeping in good company.
But yeah, Steve, so could you give our listeners a little context as to sort of what your book is about, where it began and everything like that?
Well, okay, I'll try to do this in a succinct manner, but no guarantees. When I was growing up, and especially in high school and college, I was a fanatical Marx Brothers fan, and specifically Groucho. And all I ever wanted to do was if I could, shake his hand and thank him for duck soup. But I knew that he was old and getting frail, and I figured there would never be a chance where I could meet him. But when I was a student at UCLA, I started a petition drive to force Universal to clear the rights to reissue Animal Crackers, which was the Marx Brothers' second film, came out in 1930 and was made by Paramount. Mm-hmm. But in the 50s, MCA Universal acquired Paramount's old films, including Animal Crackers, but because the copyright had lapsed, it needed to be renewed, and Universal didn't think there was any reason to spend money on an old black and white Marx Brothers film. They were much more interested in Airport 75, and it was their big film that year. So some friends and I started up the committee for the re-release of Animal Crackers, and we had a table on Bruin Walk, And there were tables for legalizing marijuana and gay rights and ending the war. Things have really changed a lot. See. And I managed to get in touch with Erin Fleming, who was the controversial woman who was in charge of Groucho's life. She was technically his manager, but she really controlled his personal and professional life.
Is this where we play the Bach organ music?
If you want, yes.
Were they lovers at all?
Anyway,
Jack asked a question of whether they were they shtupping each other.
No, I don't think there was any physical relationship between them, but he was quite smitten with her and deferential to her. And that weaker he got, the stronger she got. She sort of fed off the fact that he became dependent on her, and that was a difficult equation because she was an extremely volatile woman and actually was later diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. So putting someone that sometimes delusional in charge of a frail old man is a kind of a scary situation. But she brought Groucho to UCLA. I said, Groucho, I'm very happy to be meeting you after all this time. And he said, well, you should be. And Erin said, this is Steve Stoliar. He's trying to get Animal Crackers re-released. And Groucho said, did you get it? And I said, not yet, but I'm working on it. And he said, you better or I'll fire you. And I said, I didn't realize I was working for you. How much are you paying me? And he said, a little less than nothing. So we chatted, which was the thrill of my life, in front of a bunch of news cameras and interviewers and people from newspapers and stuff. Universal caved and spent the money to reissue Animal Crackers. And it broke the box office record at the UA Westwood Theater that had been set by the French Connection a few years earlier. And it was extremely gratifying to see lines almost around the block to see this movie. And it vindicated that it was worth Universal's while to do this. So I had a couple of summer jobs fall through in 1974 for which I remain eternally grateful. And I finally figured I had nothing to lose. I called Erin Fleming and I said, is there anything at all that you think someone could? And she said, well, actually, I had been Groucho's secretary, but now I'm his manager, and we need someone to handle all the fan mail and to organize all of Groucho's memorabilia that's going to be donated to the Smithsonian after Groucho's gone. And we would need someone who really knows a lot about the Marx Brothers. And the image in my mind's eye is of like a Tex Avery cartoon where I'm at their doorstep while she's still talking to me on the phone. Because it was so exciting when I realized she was offering me that job. And I had initially thought that I would just probably be working in an office building and he would come in a couple times a month to sign checks or pick things up. She said, oh, no, dear, there's a room there that you can use as your office, and you can make your own hours. So, and I eventually had a key to the place.
His house?
To his house.
Oh, wow.
Yes, 1083 North Hillcrest Road in Beverly Hills. And I could, and so initially I worked there. The first week I worked 6 days a week, and then on Sunday I was, since it was during summer vacation, I was at our family home in Tarzana in the San Fernando Valley. And on Sunday, I thought, why do I want a day off from that? And I showered and dressed and drove over there again. So I was working 7 days a week at first because I couldn't get enough of it. It was like all I wanted was to meet this guy. And here I am being paid money to actually sit and... Also, Groucho was very egalitarian, so he insisted I sit at the lunch table instead of going into the kitchen as if I were the help or something. So that meant that I was there to witness his conversations and reminiscences and thoughts on politics and films and anecdotes and all that. And of course, when people would come for lunch, I was a part of it. It wasn't like, oh, well, someone important's coming over, so take your bowl into the other room. So I would get to sit there while Groucho was having lunch with Jack Lemmon or George Burns or his old writers, and listen and participate in their conversation. So it was just an astonishing thing to go through at the age of 19, and I couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah, it sounds almost overwhelming. I have to pick out one little thing in the middle. Do you want to hear an obscure French Connection anecdote?
Is this a French Connection?
Yes, it is. It is a very humorous, hopefully. Sue Mangers, you know Sue Mangers. She was the super agent to the Stars, and she represented Gene Hackman, and she wanted him to be a part of the French Connection. But I forget what studio released French Connection. Was it Fox?
I can't remember.
But she was calling back and forth trying to get him cast in the part, but they kept offering it to other people. So one day they called her and they said, "You can stop calling. We've cast someone. We've cast Jackie Gleason." So so into the phone receiver she said, "Jackie Gleason, what, was James Coco not available?" So it's one of those things, whenever I hear French Connection, that's where my mind goes to, because I've never actually seen the movie, but that's the only...
It's a wonderful film. You know, the truth is, Gleason was a very good dramatic actor.
He was, yeah. What was the...
the Hustler and Soldier in the Rain and Gigot. But the idea of him running down the street as fast as he could, chasing after the bad guys, much less the driving chase against the subway car and all that, I don't think that would have been a particularly good fit, literally or figuratively. But he was, he was a good actor.
Oh, he was.
It's always interesting when you hear about those. You know who was supposed to play? Columbo was supposed to be Bing Crosby.
Oh yeah, and then I was reading the other day that I was going to bring this up on Murder, She Wrote. Murder, She Wrote was written for Gene Stapleton, not Angela Lansbury. But
she could have done it.
Yeah. She didn't want to do it because she didn't want to get into another big series, so they gave it next to Angela Lansbury. And while we're on that deviated subject for a minute, in all the interviews I listened, nobody's asked you about Murder, She Wrote. I just wanted to see if you had any memories about writing I think you wrote one episode for that show.
Yeah, I wrote one called "If a Body Meet a Body." Get it? Through the rye. The executive producer, Peter Fisher, I knew because when I was a production secretary at Universal, we were in the same suite of offices. And then in 1982, Dick Cavett hired me as a writer, which resulted in my moving to New York and making the quantum leap from secretary to professional writer. Mm-hmm. And then when I moved back in 85, moved back from New York, I pitched some stories to Peter, and he thought one of them was worth developing, and so I ended up doing an episode. And actually, it was both the classiest show that I ever wrote for and the one that they tinkered with the least, the staff writers on the show. Huh. And probably the only significant thing for old movie and TV buffs is that it ended up being the last time that Robert Sterling and Ann Jeffries made a television appearance together. They were the stars of Topper in the 50s, which was a favorite show of mine when I was just a toddler. So it was kind of cool to think that the show I wrote ended up employing them in what turned out to be their last joint appearance.
Do you remember any instances? Did you meet Angela Lansbury at all?
I didn't. I'm chuckling because I'm a simpleton. No, I'm chuckling because a couple of years after that, I was on the Universal lot, and maybe you've had this experience where you turn a corner and someone appears and your mind can't zoom through the Rolodex quick enough of, were you a teacher of mine? Are you a cashier at the grocery store? Did we go to summer camp together? Did you work for... So there's
Yep,
just
I had
this
it happen.
instant
It happened to me last
flashcard.
week.
Yeah, facial recognition. So I was about to walk into the producers building at Universal, and the doors opened, and out strode this kind of late middle-aged woman, and our eyes met, and I thought for a second she was someone I had worked with in the steno pool. And I said, "Hi," and Angela Lansbury said, "Hello," and continued, and I thought, "Oh, Jesus." So that was my quote meeting with Angela Lansbury, was mistaking her for a production secretary.
Well, that was good enough for me. I guess that was actually better than meeting her, as it makes a better story.
I guess.
So let's go back through the doors of Groucho's house. My favorite story from the book is the night that Mae West came and saw Groucho.
Yeah, that was a remarkable thing. She had written a letter to Groucho saying that she was remembering sitting in the screening rooms at Paramount in the early 30s waiting for her rushes and laughing at the dailies for, I guess it would have either been horse feathers or duck soup, and saying that, Groucho should come up and see her sometime, essentially. So Groucho didn't feel like going over there, but he extended an invitation because a really good friend of Mae West was a producer named Stan Musgrove, who was also a good friend of Hector Arces, who ended up being Groucho's biographer. So Hector and Stan Musgrove arranged for her to come over, and Aaron Fleming was very nervous about, this grande dame of the silver screen coming over. Groucho, of course, wouldn't have been made uncomfortable meeting someone legendary because he was legendary and he had spent decades hanging out with legendary people, so it wasn't as big a deal to him. And
he wasn't one to bow to authority to begin with.
Right. And he wouldn't be intimidated at the thought of, oh my gosh, that's Mae West over there. So, but Aaron said, "Groucho, I want you to be sure to be on your best behavior," which is sort of like telling a kid not to touch the wet paint. I was able to remain there until she arrived, and she came in with this guy Paul Novak, who was one of the muscle men in her Vegas act in the 50s and was sort of her Aaron Fleming looking after things. And the first thing Groucho said was, "Hello, Mae, what do you hear from Bill Field?" And she said, "In your dreams, Groucho, in your dreams." Because they had made My Little Chickadee at Universal, and reportedly W.C. Fields and Mae West hated each other. Their egos bumped into each other like Macy's balloons. and if they had something to tell the other person, they had to write it down and give it to someone to hand to the other person because they couldn't stand. So of all the things, the first thing he says is, "What do you hear from Bill Field?" So Aaron, of course, is turning purple. And then not long after that, Groucho said, "I understand they threw you in the pokey once," because she was jailed on a morals clause in the 20s because she had a play called Sex, which was racy stuff in the 20s, and it was raided by the police, and she spent a few days in a jail. So in the first few minutes, Groucho had managed to ask about her least favorite co-star and point out that she had been thrown into the pokey, as he said. But it ended up being a really delightful evening. Harpo's son, Bill Marx, who was a composer and a great jazz piano player, was there in case she felt like singing. But she said she didn't have her backup track to really sing anything, but she said, "I could do some reciting if you like." And so Bill sat down at the piano and starts playing this honky-tonk version of Frankie and Johnny, and Mae West steadies herself against the baby grand piano and starts reciting Pleasure Man, which was another play that she had written, and just stanza after stanza about this woman who loved and lost and all this. And in the background the whole time is Bill playing ding 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 ding, and it really, it's like if you squinted, it's like, gee, this could be She Done Him Wrong or I'm No Angel or something. And I just sat there thinking, wow, it's the king and queen of early Paramount comedy in the same room, and I'm a part of this.
It must have been humbling to be able to experience that just out of the blue.
Yeah, it was. There were a number of times when I didn't expect to be part of something, and then and they said, oh, sure, you can stick around. Such as the night S.J. Perelman arrived from one of his round-the-world jaunts. But the Mae West one, I brought a book for her to sign just in case she was in a signing mood. And she wrote to Steve, sin-searly. She liked to separate the sin from the searly. Mae West. So, yeah, that was... And she was also very short. I think she was 4'11" without shoes on.
Oh, wow.
And at pale... super pale. I think she never went out in sunlight like a vampire. She was a creature of the night.
She's almost translucent.
Huh?
Almost translucent.
Yeah, well, not quite translucent, but just white on white, and then that preposterous pile of blonde, in quotes, hair atop her head. But really, it still was a thrill, and she was still very much Mae West in the way she expressed herself and talked, and it was quite a night.
You spoke of Mae West signing your book. One of the questions I was going to ask you is, one of the things that popped out of me in the book is that you talk about Groucho's bookshelf with all of the signed copies that people had given to him. Can you give us some highlights from that shelf?
Well, his bookcase was filled with books that either he had purchased or been given over the years. And by over the years, they went back at least to the 20s. And, I would open some of them and it would be signed to him by George Kaufman or James Thurber's wife. One was signed by Margaret Dumont. There was Robert Benchley. And really, I credit Groucho with turning me on to the whole Algonquin Roundtable set. Robert Benchley, Mark Connolly, George S. Kaufman, Dorothy Parker, Donald Ogden Stewart, Alexander Wolcott. And he appreciated the fact that this kid, that I wasn't just into like smoking pot and being a hippie and listening to loud noise rock and roll, but that I cared about George Gershwin and Irving Berlin, and that I was showing an interest in these authors that he was friends with. And so, I would take a copy off the shelf and go into my office and read it a little bit at a time. And he finally said, you can borrow any of the books, just be sure you bring them back. So his remarkable collection became my library, and I would bring it back to the dorm or home, wherever I was, depending on the time of year. And after I read it, I would, in fact, bring it back.
Did he let you keep anything?
Huh?
Did you get to keep anything?
Well, I'm hardly going to rip off my employer. No, he gave me books that he wrote, and I still have the key to the house, even though it has been completely remade. The house, not the key. But it's what it represents. And I had, there were photos that I had him sign. He usually would just sign to and then the person's name from Groucho. But I had a really nice portrait of him from '39, and I say, could you say something personal so people will know that I really knew you? And he said, what do you want me to say? I love you? He wrote to Steve, a great secretary, Groucho, and that's a real prize. And about a year later, I got another photo. It was a beautiful original Paramount portrait from Animal Crackers, and he signed it to Steve, a valuable man, from Groucho. And then he accidentally crossed the L like it was a T. And then he looked at it and he said, it looks like it says to Steve the vegetable man. You know what I mean. So I got a story with that slight error on his part.
Do you know what happened to any of those books that were on his bookshelf? Did they go to the Smithsonian?
Well, a certain amount of stuff was able to be held back by his family. And so I think Arthur and Miriam, who recently died at the age of 90, wanted some things. I was very dismayed to find out considerably after the fact that there had been an estate sale of a lot of stuff that had I known about, I would have wanted, because I would have known what context it was there. Not the primo rare things, but nevertheless. And I found out because I was at a used bookstore in Hollywood, and let me see, it was a copy of the Paris Review. Every few years it would come out with a compendium of interviews with famous authors, and they managed to get people like James Thurber and John O'Hara and S.J. Perelman. And I opened one because it had an interview with S.J. Perelman, and on the inside cover was an inscription from Dick Cavett to Groucho, which I recognized from Groucho's shelf. And I went over to the seller and I said, "How did you get this?" And he said, "Oh, there was a big estate sale. You could pick up a lot of things on the cheap." And I just thought, man, it was because by the end of Groucho's life, there were these two warring factions, initially over care for Groucho, and then after he was gone, over his estate. And one of them was Aaron Fleming, and the other was his son Arthur Marx and the Bank of America on behalf of Groucho and his estate. And because I was hired by Aaron, Arthur and his camp saw me as one of the enemy, because I was one of those Aaron people. But because I had given a 3-day deposition in which it became very clear that I had no affection for Aaron and thought that she was abusive and difficult, Aaron lost her allegiance to me. And so I sort of ended up falling in between the two factions. So nobody told me anything about a memorial service, and nothing. I got no updates on the estate sale or anything like that. But a lot of stuff that I spent months putting together in some order for the Smithsonian did go to the Smithsonian, because someone has sent me a list of all the things they have. It's funny, some of the things that they have, because there's things that are like notes that I wrote and push pinned onto the bulletin board, and it's like, there it is, preserved at the Smithsonian. But it's better that they have it than not. So
yeah, because my mind keeps going back to those books and wanting to have the one that Margaret Dumont gave him, but Lord knows where that is now. It's
no idea. I remember it was signed M. Dumont.
Oh.
She didn't sign Margaret or Maggie or Margaret Dumont. It was M. Dumont.
Well, odds are Groucho would have known who it came from anyways.
I think she gave it to him on the occasion of them doing the Hollywood Palace, and she died shortly after that.
Yeah, I think 2 weeks after that.
Old time's sake gift for him. I remember it was a small book. It wasn't anything significant to me. It was like a book of poetry or something like that, but it wasn't anything that really tied them together. But it was nice of her to think of him.
Since we are on the subject of the illustrious lady who has become the obsession of my life, what do you remember?
Someone had to.
Exactly, yeah. She's my girlfriend at the time being. So, what are your first memories of Groucho interacting with her in the movies, since you didn't get to see them interact in real life?
I didn't know who she was initially, because even though I loved old movies, I didn't really know the classic character actors and actresses yet. But I loved their interplay. I specifically remember the exchange in Duck Soup where Groucho asks for a lock of her hair, and she says, "A lock of my hair? Why, I never..." And he said, "I'm letting you off easy. I was going to ask for the whole wig." That was a a really funny line, and it still is after all 80 years. And then as I got more into reading about Groucho and the Marx Brothers, I realized that she had been with them in Broadway and was in, essentially half of their films. And then, of course, it was easy to spot her in Never Give a Sucker and Even Break, and even What a Way to Go.
With Shirley MacLaine.
Shirley MacLaine and Robert Mitchum and Dick Van Dyke.
Which is a strange movie.
Yeah, and she sort of plays a Margaret Dumont character.
Yeah. She plays Shirley MacLaine's mother.
Yeah.
Which is...
Yeah.
And she's...
But still that same kind of... And I'm assuming you have seen the deleted sequence from Tales of Manhattan.
I have.
The pool thing. That, that's another thing about you kids today. I'll turn into one of those old, you kids today, you don't know what it was like. We had only read about, it's the same thing as with Animal Crackers, because that had been tied up for more than 20 years, so none of us Marx Brothers fans had seen it. That we had read about the Tales of Manhattan deleted sequence with Fields and Margaret Dumont and the pool table, and there were photos of it in books on Fields, but it wasn't around to look at. And now, of course, with YouTube, you just punch in a couple of things and you're watching it. Back then, if it existed, you had to wait for it to cycle through late night local television to see a classic old movie. Now it's literally in the palm of your hand, and then all of these rare things, outtakes and behind the scenes and alternate takes and things like that have turned up and are now in circulation, and it's really a joy to see them when you've heard about them so long, and turns out it exists after all.
And that's been a godsend for me, because not only is the Tales of Manhattan scene on YouTube, but also the Hollywood Palace with Margaret Dumont in its entirety, the entire hour, and Margaret Dumont's first movie, which was a 1917 silent version of Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. And that is on YouTube in its entirety, too.
Is she Defarge?
I think she's an uncredited beggar woman.
Oh.
I think
guess obviously she did better, because she played a wealthy woman later on.
This was
playing a poor person and then playing a rich person.
Well,
I don't think she was ever rich herself, but at least on screen she was.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it makes sense that she would only have had a small part because she hadn't established herself on Broadway.
No, and that was her one production before she got married, and all the Marx Brothers stuff happened after her husband died.
Steve.
So her next movie was Coconuts?
I believe so. I think there might have been one while they were married, but it wasn't anything. I don't even think it exists, the copy of it.
So it's just like a bit part and then a 12-year gap until she emerged fully clad as Athena from the brow of Zeus.
Well, the Coconuts was her first credited performance. All the rest were, because a lot of people, you were talking about the young people. Yeah. Back then, the credits were at the beginning, and you couldn't inundate the viewer with every single person that was in the show. So you maybe got the 10 best people, the 10 best known people that were in the movie, and then you got some sound people and some composers and the director. You didn't get the gaffer or or who played the uncredited extra at the party.
Right. You had to wait for IMDb to be born,
which has helped significantly for us who write about people who died in 1965.
Now, Steve,
yes.
you talk about how spoiled we are. Did you actually see Animal Crackers before you got it for that premiere, or was that the first time you saw it, actually?
I did. What happened was, it wasn't that the film was thought to be lost. It existed, but it wasn't legal to show it and charge money for it, because that would have been a copyright infringement. Mm-hmm. So it was in this weird limbo. Someone told me that they were running a bootleg print of it at a revival house in Anaheim, in Orange County, California. So in December of '73, a group of friends, and of course all my friends were Marx Brothers fans, we piled into a car and drove all the way to Orange County just to see this movie, which was, by the way, in the midst of a gas crisis where they were having to, it's like even and odd license plates could get gas on alternate days because gasoline was so precious back then. But we felt it was worth a tank of gas to go see this. And it was just an awful print, murky and blurry, just I don't know how many generations removed from a decent print it was, but we couldn't believe we were seeing what was at the time the great missing link in the 13 Marx Brothers film, and one of their best. If any of their films had been thought to be unavailable and then was finally available, even if it was like The Big Store or Go West, it still would have been cause for celebration. But this was Groucho as Captain Spaulding and his theme song and, a big Broadway hit and all that. So it was great to see it again. And that's what made me think about trying to connect with Groucho. I thought in my naivete, I wonder if Groucho knows this is playing in Orange County. Maybe he'd like to see it. And I knew that his phone number was unlisted in the Beverly Hills phone book. But I also knew from thumbing through it that his friend Harry Ruby, who did the music and for Animal Crackers and also worked on as a comedy writer on other films, his number was listed. So I called, and a nurse answered and said he was taking a nap, but she would take down the information. If he had answered, none of what happened would have happened, because he would have had no reason to take down my phone number and my name. But it was because the nurse wanted him to call me back to find out what this was about. And I had a conversation with Harry Ruby, which at the time was a huge thrill, because I knew that he and Groucho had been friends since like the 20s, and he worked on their Paramount films. And he said, well, I'll be sure and give Grouch the information. And I thought, oh my God, I'm talking to someone who's going to talk to Groucho Marx because of something I did. And that led to getting a phone call from Aaron Fleming, which led to the UCLA thing. So piecing together the thing, not necessarily chronologically, but yes, I had seen that murky, awful print. And when I finally talked to Aaron, all she cared about was, how could they show it? It's illegal for them to show it. What made them think they had the right to show it? As if I had any idea who manages the Old Town movie theater in Anaheim, and it didn't matter to me. But anyway, that's the short answer to your question.
And it was, I knew we were going to be interviewing you today, so I popped in the Blu-ray of Animal Crackers last night, and I thought for that moment that it's so fortunate that we have that now at the push of a button.
Yep.
Whereas back then it was a whole few months long campaign, wasn't it, to get Animal Crackers re-released?
Yeah, it was in I think it was February of '74 that he came to Brew and Walk, and then it was released in spring of '74. Then it was quite a while before it was shown on television, and actually it got a pretty good send-off. It was like a primetime Channel 4 Saturday Night at the Movies special presentation, which was really cool.
Oh, wow.
And then eventually VHS and DVD. And now what's cool about the Blu-ray is they found an original print in a British archive that included some brief snippets that had been edited out when the film was reissued in the 40s, because they didn't comply with the Hays Office prissiness about what's proper. And little bits here and there that, unless you're really familiar with the film, you wouldn't notice. But the most significant thing is during Hooray for Captain Spaulding, Margaret Dumont sings, "He is the only white man who covered every acre." And for years, there's just a jump cut
to "Hooray, hooray, hooray."
Hooray, hooray, hooray. But you finally get to see him saying, "I think I'll try and make her,"
which is so innocuous now.
It's innocuous now, of course, but back then when things were more prudish, once the Hays, I mean, in 1930 it was okay, because people are surprised when they see pre-code films and see that there's women who aren't wearing underwear.
Oh yeah,
and you can kind of see through their negligees, and there's king size beds that they sleep in and they're not married, and film titles have like God and hell and damn in them. And then when the code came in 1934, the big chill set in, and it had to be separate beds even if you're married, and no bad language, and all bad guys had to be punished, and there couldn't be intimations of infidelity and all this stuff. So something as innocuous as I think I'll Try and Make Her, it was easier for them to just cut that out. Now, foreign countries didn't have to abide by the Hays Office because that was just in America. So every now and again you get a print that escaped the scissors because it went over there in 1930 and stayed there, and that's why the Blu-ray of Animal Crackers has those little bits in it again.
Yeah, I have a book as part of my research that's called, I think, The Censorship Papers. I forget who the author is, but he has a whole chapter on the Marx Brothers, and he delineates all of their movies and original letters from the Hays Office saying, okay, you got to cut this. And it does have the memo about, I think I'll Try and Make Her that says, you got to take that out. And then they would slip some things through that they thought they were absolutely going to get the red pen, but they still got through.
Yeah, even when the natives bring in the giant chest from Africa, and Groucho says, this magnificent chest, indicating Margaret Dumont, who was quite buxom, that was fine. I don't know whether they didn't get it. There's always those things that happen when, and I've had that experience working in network TV, where something is in, not because they thought, all right, but because they didn't get it. Like when Saturday Night Live had a product, Dan Aykroyd was selling an aerosol can of Pussy Whip. And it was sort of like, I think the gag was like, it's made for cats, or made from cats, and it's a dessert topping or something like that. And it made it through because I guess no one at NBC thought of the other meaning of it. But so it may be that's why some of those things stayed in, or Harpo hitting his butt to the time of the music while Chico's playing the piano.
Oh yeah, and then, well, I mean, if a lot of people listening to our show who are younger, if there are any younger ones here, the fact
if there are people listening,
we always hope so. On I Love Lucy, you couldn't say the word pregnant; you had to say expecting.
Now, of course, you can show how to get there.
Exactly. But that's on the cable channels. You got HBO, you can still see. But I mean, network TV now, you could get away with, anything to a certain extent.
Pretty much, yeah.
Except the little piddly stuff.
Also language. The list of four-letter words that you can say has gotten longer, which is interesting.
Steve, what have you gotten away with as a writer? What's the most outrageous thing that you snuck in there?
I wasn't really trying to push that particular envelope. I would do little things that were sort of for me to appreciate, or for close friends to appreciate, that didn't really matter. For a while, I worked on an extremely short-lived light action series called Codename Foxfire, and it was just about these three women who solve crimes, and I mean, it wasn't very good, but it paid well, and it was fun and interesting. So in one of the episodes I wrote, there's a scene that takes place in a diner, and I decided I would call it PG's Roadhouse, the pun on PG Wodehouse, because I felt like it was so slumming it to be writing this stuff where, the car fishtails and he zooms after him as bullets fly, and it's like, oh, yawn, another one of these shows. But I'll put in a PG's Roadhouse gag, and a friend of mine who ran a rare bookstore in New York got the biggest charge out of that. But it's sort of like a victory for the literati. And it needed to be called something. So rather than just calling it Joe's Bar, I called it that. So the four people in America who got it, and the others didn't care. So that, I wasn't interested in trying to get away with dirty stuff.
Well, it's kind of like that line in, I forget, I think it was one of S.J. Perelman's lines that was, the professor is waxing Roth.
Yes, tell Roth to wax the dean. Well, and I mean, it's a preposterous turn of phrases to begin with, because no one, especially some secretary in 1932, is going to express herself that way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of a contrived gag, because no one went around saying, that man over there is waxing wroth. Waxing wroth means turning angry. You know, when the moon is waxing, it's getting bigger and bigger, closer to a full moon, and then it's waning. And wroth is anger or rage. But you really only phrase something like that as the setup to the punchline. It doesn't really work as a piece of dialogue, except for the fact that you're about to turn it into a joke. And that was something that was really cool about when Perelman came to Groucho's. I wasn't expecting to be there, but Aaron said I could stick around, and I was in my usual t-shirt, jeans, and tennis shoes. And I said, shouldn't I go home and change? She said, oh, Sid won't mind. And then the doorbell rings, and Perelman comes in an immaculate three-piece suit with a woman with a floor-length fur and two other friends who were just dressed in the most fashionable, upscale outfits. And there I am in my tennis shoes saying, it's a real honor to meet you. And I'm thinking, again, he's probably thinking, I can imagine. But what was neat was when we were sitting in the living room, and Groucho was there, and Aaron was there, and Perelman and his entourage, some of Perelman's guests were saying, oh, I shot an elephant in my pajamas. That was your line, wasn't it, Sid? No, I didn't write that. Oh, vaccinated with a phonograph needle? You wrote that, Sid, didn't you? No, that wasn't one of mine. And then I said, the professor is waxing wroth, and he shot me a look. And he said, yes, as a matter of fact, that was one of mine. And it was like, ooh, I proved myself. The kid scored. These theater people got it wrong. And in fact, when I went back to my office after a while, and Perelman had to take a leak, and on his way back, I stopped him and showed him that Groucho had an early draft of Horse Feathers that Perelman had written. And I said, have you seen this lately? And he said, no. And he was thumbing through it. And so we started talking, and I told him about how much I loved the Algonquin Round Table, and especially Robert Benchley. And he was saying, oh, yeah, Benchley was we were very close friends, wonderful man, a wonderful writer. And then he was advising me, you know, he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I guess write for television. And he was trying to urge me to write plays because they remain truer to the writer's original words instead of getting rewritten, even though it wasn't the most lucrative thing. And I just managed to corner him for like 15 minutes, and I started to hear, from the other room, where's Sid? What happened to Sid? Is he okay? Is he feeling okay? And it's like Sid was talking to Stevie in the other room about the Algonquin Round Table. So that was a real highlight for me. And then he was staying at the Chateau Marmont, which this was years before it was known as where Belushi died. It was known as one of the great classy Europeans. It was where Garbo would stay when she would be visiting from New York. And Perelman was staying there. And I said, if I brought one of your books by, would you sign it? And he said yes. He said, leave it at the desk to my attention at the chateau, and I'll be happy to. So I went out and got a copy of his latest book, which was called Vinegar Puss, which was just a collection of his most recent comic essays for the New Yorker. And I called the next day to the chateau, and I said, is there a package for Steve Stoliar? Yes. And I raced over there and tore open the bag and flipped open the book, and it said, for Steve Stoliar, with very cordial wishes for his ultimate success as a writer. Huh? S.J. Perelman, 1975. So that's the kind of thing that really inspires you to keep at it. Because if I'd become a plumber, people would say, why does it say that? And I'd just say, with cordial regards for his ultimate success in plumbing.
Well, as we wind down a little bit, sadly, we have about 5 minutes left. I have one.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I know. Well, and I hardly threw half of the things I wanted to ask, so you have to come back at a later time. But I wanted to ask a rather profound question for the end.
No. I probably don't have a good answer, but go ahead.
Groucho was, you would say, a fairly political person, would you say?
Yes.
And my question is, what special role do you think that the Marx Brothers serve in the era of Donald Trump?
Comic relief, for the apart from the comic relief that Trump himself provides, except for the minor technicality that he happens to be the president of the United States. So that sort of dilutes the strength of finding everything about him amusing. I mean, thank God these films exist. I've become friends with a young actor, and he wasn't all that familiar with their films and asked to borrow my Blu-ray set, which I'm alleged to be getting back tomorrow at lunch. And he emailed me and said, "These are great. These are so funny." And instead of saying, "How could you have gotten to the age of 30 and not even have known about them?" It pleases me the same way back when I was working for Groucho, his friends and associates who were in their 70s and 80s got a kick out of the fact that this 19 or 20-year-old knew all about their work and admired it and all that. So now I'm not their age yet, but there's enough generational difference that I find the cockles of my heart being warmed when someone says, I have a 6-year-old granddaughter, and she was watching Duck Soup, and she was laughing at Harpo. And I thought, good, the torch can still be carried and passed along, even though these are in black and white, even though there are references to things that no one under 70 understands without Google or a book that analyzes the jokes or something. So I'm just, I'm pleased that they're still there, and all their films, and keep the faith. I still have faith that the democratic process will digest the Trump presidency and excrete it and then move along, and it will just have been this strange blip. I've become friends with Woody Allen, and in one of his recent letters, he says, I don't even think of Trump as a president. It just seems like this strange, surreal detour. It's just like he's holding this place for a while, but it's very hard for him to accept. And I think a lot of us feel that way.
Yeah, two of us here are the same way.
Huh?
We're the same way, the two of us in this room right now.
Yeah, it's disbelief. And sometimes I find myself more upset with the people who still believe in him than I am with Trump, because he's true to himself. He is as he's been through the whole campaign and into his presidency. But the people that he suckered into voting for him, and they're still behind him, they're the ones I want to strangle. I just read today that half of the people who voted for Trump believe he won the popular vote. It's like a political fundamentalism where you're trying to say, here are 8 reasons why God doesn't exist, and they just cover their ears and say, no, the flowers, the beauty of a flower, and there had to have been intelligence behind it. Goodbye.
I didn't know that you discussed theology with Kermit the Frog.
Yeah. Oh, Kermit the Frog here. Yes, and they fired the current Kermit, and we don't know whose version of the story is the real one, so it's probably somewhere in between. Because according to the Henson people, they said this guy was being very difficult about re-upping, like holding them hostage.
Oh, his contract?
And he's saying, it came out of nowhere, and I had no way of knowing, and it meant the world to me, so who knows how that'll shake down.
Well, maybe you can be the replacement.
Okay. We'll make the appropriate call.
We'll contact your agent.
Oh, do.
So I think I prefaced this interview by saying that at the end of every episode, we like to recommend something that we've used in the previous week, just as kind of, that Martha Stewart capper of bringing something new to someone's life. Mine very shortly, since it was apropos of this interview, I just ordered the new pressing of one of Groucho's books called Groucho and Me, which I have read many times, and it's been recently re-released. I think a few years ago they had that renaissance of the books all coming out again. So if you want to learn a lot about Groucho that may or may not all be true but is very funny, you can read the book called Groucho and Me by Groucho Marx.
That sounds pretty good, Stephen. All right, my recommendation this week is, so I was kind of scouring Netflix for something to watch, and I came across one of my favorite movies, and I just had to share it with you guys. In 2012, I think it was 2002, Adam Sandler starred in the movie Punch Drunk Love, which is what I want to recommend. Steve, have you seen Punch Drunk Love? It's kind of a departure for him. Usually he kind of just does those like goofy man-child people, and I usually don't like him. Actually, I haven't liked him since Happy Gilmore, I would say. But in this one, he, it's actually a pretty serious role. The director is P.T. Anderson, who did There Will Be Blood and The Master, Magnolia, yes. Boogie Nights, yeah. So Punch Drunk Love was, I think, his fourth movie. And Adam Sandler kind of plays an Adam Sandler type character. He is like prone to fits of rage, but it's kind of more like of a melodramatic,
more human.
More human, and you actually like really feel for this guy. And it's kind of this love story, but it's really well done. It's definitely one of my favorite movies. Steve, have you seen this one? Punch Drunk Love?
I've seen it, and I liked it then, and I liked it since I've seen it since then. And I have a friend, believe it or not, who, to him, Adam Sandler is what's wrong with comedy. And he's just sort of this disgruntled guy. Just like they keep throwing millions of dollars and Adam Sandler, and he keeps making movies, and it's about as funny as Adam Sandler. And so a few weeks ago, a friend and I were having dinner at a Chinese restaurant, and Adam Sandler came in with a few friends, and we're sitting in another room. And at one point, I went to the restroom, and as I came back, I stopped at his table. And I said, "Thank you for what you brought to Punch Drunk Love." And he got a huge grin on his face, and all the people that were with him thought, wow, that was such a great thing to compliment him for. Because it was not, quote, an Adam Sandler film. And I'm sure most people say, oh, it's so funny, will you do that thing, that voice thing? Will you be Opera Man? And will you do the Hanukkah song? And will you know? But I would have... It's like I'm not a big fan of his feature-length comedies either, like my friend, but I don't see him as, a symbol of what's wrong with the world.
Well, this movie definitely proves that theory.
I felt like it would be artificial for me to compliment him on something that I didn't mean, but then I remembered Punch Drunk Love and how good it was and how good he was in it. And I get the impression a lot of people don't take him aside and mention that. And he said, hey, thanks, man, really, thanks.
So you didn't bring up Jack and Jill.
No. And then I went home and sent an email to my friend, and I said, you may wish to unfriend me and throw my phone number away after this, and I hope you're sitting down, but I just gave Adam Sandler a compliment.
That's funny.
I was surprised he didn't have phantom pangs while it was happening. Well, thank you, Steve. This has been
Phantom Pangs, I think, was a villain in a Charlie Chan film.
I think it was Flash Gordon.
Oh. Flash, it's Dr. Zarkov.
Oh boy! So it was so nice to have you here today. Hopefully, we'll have you back again. I had a kick. I know Jack had a kick.
Someone has to have my back. I hope it's you.
Well, if anyone has to have your back, I am glad that I am one to carry the burden.
Aw.
Thank you, Steve.
So this has been the latest episode of The Objectivist
and The Vegan.
And we want to thank Steve Stoliar once again, and thank Gilbert Gottfried, because without him, I wouldn't know who Steve Stoliar was, or surprisingly, I wouldn't know who the Marx Brothers was.
I didn't know who I was until Gilbert showed me.
He has that effect on people, that very profound effect. So thank you so much, Steve, and to our listeners, you'll hear us next week.
Thank you.